The crowd called her the Beast of Ashford County. They said her face could curdle milk, that children wept at the sight of her, that even the dogs turned away. But Marcus Thorne saw something else that day at the auction. Not beauty, not yet, but a flicker of defiance in eyes that refused to beg. What he paid for in pity he would discover in wonder. And what the world had buried beneath cruelty and grime would shine brighter than anything he'd ever known. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The air in Ashford County hung thick with the smell of tobacco and sweat. September 1891 brought no relief from the heat, only a slow, suffocating stillness that made men mean and women meaner. The courthouse square buzzed with the season's final estate auction, where the belongings of the dead and the desperate exchanged hands for whatever coin could be scrounged. Furniture, livestock, tools, everything had a price. Everything could be owned. Marcus Thorne stood at the edge of the crowd, hat pulled low, jaw set tight. He wasn't a man who enjoyed spectacle. At 34, he'd already seen enough of what people became when desperation met opportunity. He'd come to Ashford for a plough blade, maybe a decent mule if the price stayed reasonable. The plantation he'd inherited from his late uncle sat 40 miles west, a sprawling piece of Virginia soil that demanded more labor than he could provide alone. He worked it himself mostly, rising before dawn and collapsing after dusk, his hands perpetually stained with earth and effort. The auctioneer, a barrel-chested man named Horace Gant, stood on a makeshift platform of stacked crates, his voice booming across the square like cannon fire. He sold off a writing desk, a set of silver candlesticks, a pair of carriage horses with ribs showing through their hides. The crowd bid with the casual cruelty of people who measured worth in dollars and cents, nothing more. Then the mood shifted. A murmur rippled through the assembly, low and ugly. Heads turned. Laughter broke out in pockets, sharp and mirthless. Marcus looked up from examining a rusted saw blade and saw them dragging her forward. She came in chains, not rope, not a simple leash, chains. Heavy iron links that rattled with every step, binding her wrists in front of her like a criminal. Her dress, if it could be called that, was little more than burlap stitching, torn at the shoulders and hem, stained with what looked like years of neglect. Her feet were bare, caked in mud up to the ankles. But it was her face that drew the crowd's venom. Dirt covered her skin in thick, uneven layers, as if she'd been sleeping in a pig pen. Her hair, matted and wild, hung in clumps around her face, obscuring most of her features. What could be seen was swollen. One eye puffed nearly shut, her lips split and crusted with dried blood. Bruises mottled her arms, her neck. She moved with a limp, favoring her left leg, and when she stumbled on the steps to the platform, no one reached to steady her. Lot 47. Gant's voice dripped with theatrical disdain. Stella Hayes, aged 22, property of the late Edmund Hayes, may he rest in considerably more peace than he found in life. The crowd roared with laughter. Someone threw a rotten apple. It hit her shoulder and splattered, but she didn't flinch. She stood there, head slightly bowed, breathing slow and steady through her nose. Now, I'll be honest with you, good folks, Gant continued, pacing the platform like a ringmaster. This here's what you'd call a mercy sale. Old Edmund, God rest him, kept her locked in a cellar for the better part of 3 years. Fed her scraps, worked her like a mule, and when he finally dropped dead of the drink, the county found her chained to a post like a dog. More laughter. A woman in a bonnet whispered to her companion, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I heard she bit him once." Drew blood. That's why he locked her up. Can't say I blame him. Someone shouted. Gant grinned. Bidding starts at $5. Now I know what you're thinking. What kind of fool pays $5 for something that looks like it crawled out of a swamp? But consider this. She's strong as an ox, doesn't talk back on account of she barely talks at all, and she's already broken in. You want cheap labor? Here's your chance. Marcus felt his stomach twist. He'd seen auctions before, livestock, land, even people back during the war. But this was different. This wasn't commerce. This was sport. $5. A man in overalls called out, grinning at his friends, "5.25. Another countered, elbowing his neighbor. The bids came fast, not because anyone wanted her, but because humiliation had a price and cruelty came cheap. The numbers climbed, $6, $7, $8, and with each increment the laughter grew louder. Marcus watched her. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't plead or cry. Her one visible eye, swollen and bloodshot, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the square, beyond the town, beyond the world that had chained her and dragged her here. There was something in that gaze, something that refused to break. $10. Gant shouted. Going once, Marcus stepped forward. He didn't plan it, didn't think about it. His boots carried him through the crowd before his mind could catch up. 15, he said. The square went quiet. Head swiveled. Gant's grin faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. Well now, $15 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 16? No one spoke. The man in overalls who'd started the bidding spat into the dirt and shook his head. You can have her, friend. I was just having fun. Gant looked around, eyebrows raised. 15 going once, twice. He slammed his gavel against the crate. Sold to Mr. Thorne, Marcus said quietly. Marcus Thorne. Well, Mr. Thorne, she's all yours. May she serve you better than she did poor Edmund. The crowd began to disperse, already losing interest. A few men clapped Marcus on the shoulder as they passed, their grins full of pity and mockery. Hope you got a strong lock on your cellar, one of them muttered. Marcus ignored them. He walked to the platform where Gant was unlocking the chains from a post. The auctioneer handed him the length of iron like it was a leash. She don't bite much anymore, Gant said with a wink. But I'd keep my distance if I were you. Edmund said she had a wild streak. Marcus took the chain, his jaw tight. He turned to face her. Up close, she was worse than he'd imagined. The dirt wasn't just surface grime. It was ground into her skin, her hair, her clothes. The smell was sharp, a mix of sweat, earth, and something sour. Her breathing was shallow, her shoulders hunched. She still wouldn't look at him. He reached for the lock on her wrists. She tensed immediately, pulling back, her one good eye finally snapping to his face. There was fear there, yes, but also something harder. Calculation, survival. I'm not going to hurt you, Marcus said, his voice low and steady. I'm going to take these off. She didn't respond, didn't move. He worked the lock slowly, giving her time to see his hands, to see that he wasn't reaching for her, only for the metal. The chains fell away with a heavy clatter. She rubbed her wrists, the skin beneath raw and blistered. Can you walk? He asked. She nodded once. Just once. Then come on. He turned and started toward the edge of the square where his wagon waited. He didn't look back to see if she followed. He didn't need to. He heard her footsteps, uneven and hesitant, trailing a few paces behind. When they reached the wagon, he climbed up to the driver's bench. She stood beside it, staring at the buckboard like she wasn't sure if she was allowed. Get in, Marcus said. Nodding toward the back, she climbed in slowly, carefully, like someone who expected the world to collapse beneath her at any moment. She settled into the corner, knees pulled to her chest, and wrapped her arms around herself. Marcus snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, wheels creaking over the rutted road. Behind them, Ashford faded into the distance, its noise and cruelty shrinking with every turn of the wheel. The journey stretched long and silent. The road wound through dense Virginia forest, the trees pressing close on either side, their canopy filtering the sunlight into dappled gold. Marcus didn't speak. He'd never been good at filling silence just for the sake of sound. Besides, what was there to say? He'd bought a woman at auction, like a piece of furniture, and now she sat in the back of his wagon, filthy and broken, heading toward a life she hadn't chosen. He glanced back once. She hadn't moved. Her head rested against the side of the wagon, her eyes half closed, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. She was listening, watching, waiting for the next cruelty. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. The plantation came into view just as dusk settled, a sprawling estate that had seen better days. The main house stood 2 stories tall, white paint peeling, shutters hanging crooked. The fields beyond stretched wide and empty, waiting for spring planting. A barn leaned slightly to one side, and a chicken coop sat quiet near the tree line. Marcus pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He climbed down, his boots hitting the dirt with a soft thud. She didn't move. "This is it," he said, looking up at her. "It's not much, but it's safe." She stared at him, then at the house, then back at him. Slowly she climbed down, wincing as her bare feet touched the ground. Marcus gestured toward the porch. "There's a room inside. You can clean up, get some rest. I'll bring you some clothes." She didn't respond, just stood there swaying slightly, her body tensed like a bowstring. He sighed. "Look, I'm not Edmund Hayes. I'm not going to chain you. I'm not going to hurt you. You're free to leave if you want, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But if you stay, you'll be safe here. You'll have food, a bed, and no one's going to lay a hand on you. That's a promise." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, barely audible, a single word slipped from her cracked lips. "Why?" Her voice was rough, like gravel scraping over metal, but it was there, real. Marcus met her gaze. "Because no one should be treated the way you were." She searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, the hidden cruelty. But she found nothing, just exhaustion, just honesty. Finally she nodded. Marcus led her inside. The house smelled of dust and old wood, but it was clean enough. He showed her to a small room off the kitchen. A servant's quarters, probably, back when the plantation had servants. There was a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a single window that looked out over the fields. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'll heat some water," he said. "You can wash up. I'll leave some clothes outside the door." She stepped into the room, moving like a ghost, and Marcus closed the door gently behind her. In the kitchen, he stoked the stove and set a large pot of water to boil. While it heated, he rummaged through an old trunk in the hallway, pulling out clothes that had belonged to his late aunt. Simple dresses, a shawl, a pair of worn boots. They'd be too big, probably, but they'd do for now. When the water was ready, he carried the basin to her door and knocked softly. "Water's here. Clothes, too." No response. But after a moment he heard movement inside. He left the items on the floor and retreated to the porch. The night had fully settled now, cool and quiet. Marcus sat on the steps, rolling a cigarette he didn't intend to smoke. His hands were shaking just slightly. He didn't know why he'd done it. Didn't know what he'd expected. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away. Not from her, not from those eyes. Inside, behind the closed door, Stella Hayes stood before the wash basin, staring at her reflection in the cloudy mirror above it. She didn't recognize herself. 3 years. 3 years since she'd seen her own face outside of the dim, warped metal of Edmund's cellar. 3 years since she'd felt water that wasn't thrown at her in punishment. 3 years since anyone had spoken to her without venom. Slowly, she dipped her hands into the warm water. It was almost painful, the heat against her cracked skin. But she didn't pull away. She cupped the water and brought it to her face, scrubbing gently at first, then harder. The dirt loosened, sliding away in dark streaks. She scrubbed her arms, her neck, her hands, watching the water turn brown, and beneath it all, something began to emerge. Something she'd forgotten was there. The first light of morning crept through the window in pale, hesitant strands. Marcus woke to the sound of nothing. No movement from the small room off the kitchen, no footsteps, no voice. For a moment, he wondered if she'd left during the night, slipped away into the darkness, like a shadow finally freed. He wouldn't have blamed her. Freedom, even uncertain freedom, beat captivity every time. He dressed quickly, pulling on work trousers and a faded cotton shirt, then made his way to the kitchen. The house still held the chill of night, floorboards creaking under his weight. He moved quietly, instinctively, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. The door to her room remained closed. Marcus busied himself with coffee, grinding beans in the handmill, setting the pot on the stove. The familiar ritual steadied him. Outside, roosters called to one another across the property, their voices cutting through the dawn silence. He poured himself a cup, black and bitter, and stood at the window watching the fields emerge from shadow. Then he heard it, the soft click of a door latch. He turned. She stood in the doorway of the small room, one hand resting against the frame, as if she needed it for balance. The transformation was startling, even incomplete. The dirt was gone from her face, revealing skin that, while still bearing the marks of abuse, held an unexpected smoothness. The swelling around her eye had reduced overnight, and though bruises still mottled her cheekbone and jaw, the features beneath were beginning to show themselves. Her hair, though still damp and tangled, had been washed. The matted clumps worked free. It fell past her shoulders in dark, uneven waves. She wore the dress he'd left, a simple grey cotton that hung loose on her thin frame. The sleeves rolled up to keep them from swallowing her hands. The boots were too large, but she'd stuffed them with cloth to make them fit. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus set down his cup.
"Coffee?"
She nodded, just barely. He poured a second cup, added a splash of milk from the icebox, and set it on the table. She moved toward it slowly, each step deliberate, as if testing whether the ground would hold. When she reached the chair, she paused, glancing at him. "Sit," he said gently. She did, wrapping both hands around the cup like it might disappear if she let go. She brought it to her lips and drank, small sips at first, then longer ones. Her eyes closed briefly, and something in her shoulders loosened, just a fraction. Marcus leaned against the counter, giving her space. "There's bread in the box if you're hungry. Some preserves too." She looked up at him, studying his face with an intensity that made him shift his weight. Then she stood, crossed to the bread box, and pulled out half a loaf. She tore a piece off with her hands, no knife, no plate, and ate standing up. Her back to him, he let her be. When she finished, she turned and spoke, her voice still rough but stronger than the night before. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air, sharp and direct. Marcus met her gaze. "Nothing you're not willing to give." "Everyone wants something. Then I guess I'm not everyone." She studied him for another long moment, then looked away, out the window toward the fields. "I can work. I'm not asking you to. Then why did you buy me?" Marcus hesitated. It was a fair question, one he'd been asking himself since the moment he'd raised his hand in that square. "Because no one else would have let you go." She turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "So it was a pity. Maybe at first," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean you owe me anything. Everyone pays eventually. Not here." She didn't respond, but something flickered in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet, but the faintest hint of curiosity. She set the cup down on the table and moved toward the door. "Where are you going?" Marcus asked. "Outside." He didn't stop her. She stepped onto the porch, barefoot despite the boots she'd been wearing moments ago. The morning air wrapped around her, cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She walked slowly down the steps and into the yard, her feet sinking into the soft grass. For the first time in 3 years, she felt ground beneath her that wasn't stone or rotted wood. She felt air that wasn't stale and suffocating. She walked to the edge of the field and stopped, staring out at the expanse of land that stretched toward the tree line. The soil was dark and rich, waiting for seed. Beyond it, the forest rose thick and wild, a wall of green that seemed to go on forever. Marcus watched from the porch, coffee in hand. He didn't call out, didn't follow. He just watched. After a while, she turned and walked toward the barn. The structure leaned slightly to the left, its red paint faded to a dull rust. The doors hung open, one hinge broken. Inside, it smelled of hay and old leather. Sunlight slanting through gaps in the roof. A horse stood in one of the stalls, a dappled grey mare with a white blaze down her face. She lifted her head as Stella approached, ears swiveling forward. Stella stopped at the stall door. The mare snorted softly, stepping closer, nostrils flaring as she caught the stranger's scent. Stella extended her hand slowly, palm up, fingers relaxed. The mare hesitated, then stretched her neck forward and brushed her muzzle against Stella's palm. For the first time since Marcus had seen her, something in Stella's face softened. Not quite a smile, but close. She ran her hand along the mare's neck, her touch gentle and sure, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. Marcus appeared in the barn doorway, moving quietly. Her name's Hazel. She's getting old, but she's steady. Stella glanced at him, then back at the mare. She's beautiful. She was my uncle's. He loved that horse more than most people. Stella continued stroking Hazel's neck, and the mare leaned into the touch, eyes half closed in contentment. Animals are better than people. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. Can't argue with that. They stood in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft shuffle of hooves in straw and the distant call of crows in the fields. Finally, Stella spoke, without looking at him. I wasn't always like this. Marcus waited. I had a family once. A mother, a father, a younger brother. We lived in Richmond. My father worked at the docks. She paused, her hand still moving over Hazel's neck. There was a fire. I was 16. I was at the market when it happened. By the time I got back, there was nothing left. No house, no family. Just ash. Marcus said nothing, letting her words settle. I had nowhere to go. No relatives, no money. I ended up in a workhouse for a while, but they kicked me out when I got sick. Said I was in trouble. Her voice remained steady, as if she were recounting someone else's story. Edmund found me on the street. He said he'd give me work, a place to stay. I was 17, desperate, I believed him. And he locked you in a cellar. Not at first. At first he just watched, waited. Then one day I tried to leave. He didn't like that. She finally looked at Marcus, her expression hard. He said I was his property, that he'd paid for my food and shelter, so I belonged to him. When I fought back, he chained me up. Said I needed to learn my place. Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp, but he kept his voice calm. He's dead now. He can't hurt you anymore. I know. She turned back to the mare. I heard him fall, heard him gasping on the floor above me. I didn't call for help. I just waited. You had every right. She looked at him sharply, as if expecting judgment, but found none. Slowly, the tension in her jaw eased. You're not what I expected, she said quietly. What did you expect? Another Edmund. Marcus pushed off the doorframe and walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. I'm not perfect. I've done things I'm not proud of. But I'm not him. And I won't let anyone treat you that way again. She searched his face, looking for the crack in the armor, the hidden agenda. But all she saw was exhaustion, and something that looked almost like loneliness. Why do you live out here alone? She asked. Marcus glanced around the barn, at the worn tools hanging on the walls, the sagging roof. This place belonged to my uncle. He raised me after my parents died, taught me how to work the land, how to survive. When he passed, he left it to me. I've been here ever since. No wife, no family. Had a wife once. She left. He said it simply, without bitterness. Said the isolation was driving her mad. Said I cared more about the land than I did about her. Maybe she was right. Do you regret it? Marcus considered the question. I regret not being what she needed. But I don't regret staying here. This land, it's the only thing that's ever made sense to me. Stella nodded slowly, as if she understood something unspoken. I'll help with the work. You don't have to. I want to. She turned to face him fully. I'm not good at sitting still. And I don't like owing people. You don't owe me anything. Maybe not. But I need to do something. Need to feel useful again. Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. But we start slow. You're still healing. I've been healing for 3 years. I'm stronger than I look. She wasn't wrong. Despite the thinness, despite the bruises, there was something resilient in the way she carried herself. Something that hadn't been broken no matter how hard Edmund had tried. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Marcus would wake before dawn and start the chores, feeding the chickens, milking the cow, checking the fences. Stella would emerge from her room shortly after, already dressed, and join him without a word. She moved through the tasks with quiet efficiency, as if muscle memory from some previous life was returning. She gathered eggs with careful hands, spoke softly to the chickens so they wouldn't startle. She hauled water from the well without complaint, even though the buckets were heavy and her arms shook with the effort. She swept the porch, mended a tear in the chicken wire, and helped Marcus stack firewood for the coming winter. They didn't talk much. Words felt unnecessary. Instead, they communicated in glances and gestures, a nod toward the barn when the mare needed tending, a raised hand when one of them needed help, lifting something heavy, a cup of coffee left on the porch railing for the other to find. In the evenings, they ate together at the small kitchen table. Marcus would cook simple fare, beans and cornbread, fried potatoes, sometimes a piece of salted pork. Stella would sit across from him, eating slowly, savoring each bite as if she still couldn't quite believe it was real. One night, as they finished dinner, she looked up at him. "You don't ask questions," Marcus set down his fork. "Figured you'd tell me what you wanted me to know when you were ready. Most people can't stand not knowing." "I'm not most people." A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, the first real smile he'd seen. It vanished quickly, but it had been there. Another night, as rain drummed against the roof, she appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a book. "Can I read?" Marcus looked up from the ledger he'd been studying. "Of course. Help yourself to any of them." She crossed to the small bookshelf in the corner and ran her fingers along the spines. "I used to read all the time before." "What did you like?" "Everything. Poetry, novels, newspapers. My mother taught me. She said reading was the only thing no one could take from you." She pulled out a worn copy of Jane Eyre and held it carefully. "I haven't held a book in 3 years. It's yours if you want it." She looked at him, something vulnerable flickering in her eyes. "Thank you." That night, she sat by the fire reading, while Marcus worked on repairing a harness. Neither spoke, but the silence wasn't empty. It was full, comfortable. The kind of quiet that existed between people who didn't need to perform for each other. Days turned into a week, then 2. The bruises on Stella's face began to fade, the swelling gone completely. Her movements became steadier, more confident. She gained a little weight, her cheeks filling out, the sharpness of her collarbones softening, and slowly, gradually, Marcus began to notice other things. The way sunlight caught in her hair when she hung laundry on the line, turning it a deep chestnut shot through with gold. The way her hands moved with unconscious grace when she worked, efficient and sure. The way she hummed sometimes when she thought no one was listening. Old melodies, barely audible, like ghosts of songs she used to know. He caught himself watching her more than he should, then forced himself to look away. She wasn't here for that. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. And he'd be damned if he'd make her feel uncomfortable in the one place she was supposed to be safe. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when their hands would brush as they worked side by side, or when their eyes would meet across the dinner table, and something unspoken would pass between them. Recognition, understanding, the beginning of something neither of them was ready to name. One afternoon, Marcus was repairing the fence along the eastern pasture when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Stella approaching, a jug of water in one hand. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said, offering it to him. He took it gratefully, drinking deep. The water was cool, flavored with a hint of mint. "Thank you." She nodded, then looked out at the field. "It's beautiful here." "It is," he agreed. "Sometimes I forget that, caught up in the work, but yeah, it is." They stood side by side, watching the wind move through the tall grass like waves on an ocean. "I think I'm starting to understand," she said quietly. "Understand what?" "Why did you stayed? Why did you chose this over everything else?" Marcus glanced at her. And I think maybe you made the right choice." Something in his chest loosened, a knot he hadn't known was there. "I'm glad you think so." She turned to him, and for the first time he saw her fully, not as the broken woman he'd bought at auction, not as the frightened survivor who'd stepped into his home. He saw her, Stella, strong, resilient, and slowly becoming whole again. "I'm glad I'm here," she said simply, and in that moment, standing in the golden afternoon light, with nothing but honesty between them, Marcus realized he was glad too. More glad than he'd been about anything in a very long time. October arrived with a vengeance, bringing with it winds that stripped the trees bare and skies that promised an early winter. The temperature dropped sharply overnight, and Marcus woke to find frost coating the windows in delicate crystalline patterns. He dressed quickly, layering a wool vest over his shirt, and made his way to the kitchen to start the fire. Stella was already there. She stood at the stove, her back to him, stirring something in a pot that filled the room with the rich scent of oats and cinnamon. She tied her hair back with a piece of ribbon he didn't recognize, and she wore one of his old flannel shirts over her dress for warmth. It was far too large, the sleeves rolled up multiple times, but somehow it suited her. "You're up early," Marcus said, rubbing sleep from his eyes. She glanced over her shoulder. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make myself useful. You made breakfast, porridge. I found some apples in the cellar, dried cinnamon in the cupboard. Hope that's all right." "More than all right." He moved to the basin and splashed cold water on his face, the shock of it driving away the last remnants of sleep. "Thank you." They ate together as dawn broke slowly over the fields, painting everything in shades of grey and silver. The porridge was simple but good, warm and filling, exactly what the cold morning required. "Storm's coming," Stella said, looking out the window. Marcus followed her gaze. The sky to the west had taken on a peculiar yellowish cast, and the wind had shifted direction, now blowing steadily from the north. "How do you know?" "The air feels different, heavier, and the birds have been quiet since before dawn." "They always know first." Marcus set down his spoon and studied her. She was right. He hadn't heard any bird song that morning, which was unusual. "You notice things like that?" "I notice everything now. When you spend 3 years in a cellar with nothing but darkness and silence, you learn to pay attention to the smallest changes. Temperature, air pressure, sounds. It's the only way to know what's happening in the world above you." She stirred her porridge absently. "I knew when seasons changed by the temperature of the water Edmund threw down to me. I knew when it was day or night by the footsteps overhead. I knew when he was drunk by how heavy his boots sounded on the floorboards." Marcus felt that familiar anger rising again, but he pushed it down. Edmund was dead. Dwelling on what he'd done wouldn't change anything. "Well, if you're right about the storm, we've got work to do. Need to secure the barn, bring in extra firewood, make sure the animals have enough feed to last a few days if we get snowed in." Stella nodded and stood, carrying their bowls to the basin. "I'll start with the chickens." They worked through the morning, moving with practiced efficiency. Marcus reinforced the barn doors with additional crossbeams and checked the roof for weak spots that might leak. Stella rounded up the chickens, coaxing the stubborn ones from their hiding spots in the bushes, and secured them in the reinforced coop. She hauled bucket after bucket of water from the well, filling every available container in case the well froze over. By noon, the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. And the first snowflakes began to fall, not the gentle, drifting kind, but hard pellets of ice that stung exposed skin. The wind picked up, howling through the gaps in the barn siding. Marcus was in the tool shed, securing the last of the equipment when he heard Hazel. The mare's whinny cut through the wind, sharp and distressed. He dropped the hammer he'd been holding and ran toward the barn. Inside, Hazel paced her stall frantically, eyes rolling white, ears pinned flat against her head. She kicked at the wooden boards, and Marcus could see foam gathering at the corners of her mouth. "Easy, girl," he said, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "Easy now." But Hazel wouldn't calm. She reared suddenly, hooves flashing dangerously close to Marcus's head. He stumbled backward, heart pounding. Stella appeared in the barn doorway, snow dusting her hair and shoulders. She took in the scene instantly. Marcus pressed against the wall, the mare in full panic, without hesitation. She walked straight toward the stall. "Stella, wait." Marcus started, but she was already there. She didn't speak to the horse, didn't make soothing sounds or extend her hand. Instead, she simply stood at the stall door, completely still, her eyes fixed on Hazel with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the animal's terror. The mare's movements slowed. Her ears swiveled forward, focusing on Stella. The whites of her eyes receded. Stella remained motionless, barely breathing, her entire being concentrated on the horse. Seconds stretched into a full minute. 2 minutes. The only sounds were the wind outside and Hazel's gradually slowing breath. Then Stella opened the stall door and stepped inside. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. "Stella, don't—" But it was too late. She was in the stall with a panicked horse that outweighed her by 1,000 pounds, and she was walking closer, still without speaking, still with that unwavering focus. Hazel didn't move, didn't rear or kick. She just stood there, trembling, as Stella approached and placed one hand on her neck. The transformation was immediate. The mare's entire body relaxed, the tension draining from her muscles like water. She lowered her head and pressed her face against Stella's shoulder, breathing deep and even. Stella's other hand came up to stroke behind Hazel's ears, her movements slow and rhythmic. She leaned in close, her forehead touching the horse's neck, and closed her eyes. Marcus watched in stunned silence. He'd worked with horses his entire life, had seen skilled handlers calm spooked animals, but he'd never seen anything like this. It wasn't technique. It wasn't training. It was something else entirely, something that looked almost like communication. After several minutes, Stella stepped back. Hazel remained calm, standing quietly in her stall, no trace of the earlier panic. Stella closed the stall door and turned to Marcus. Her face was pale, beaded with sweat despite the cold. "She knew," Stella said quietly. "Knew what?" "There's something wrong. Not with her. With something else. Something outside," Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know exactly. But she was trying to warn us. Animals always know when something's not right." Stella moved toward the barn door, scanning the darkening landscape. "We need to check the property now, in this weather. Especially in this weather." There was such certainty in her voice that Marcus didn't argue. They bundled up in heavy coats and wrapped scarves around their faces, then stepped out into what had become a full-blown blizzard. The wind screamed across the open fields, driving snow so thick that Marcus could barely see 10 feet in front of him. Stella grabbed his arm and pulled him close so he could hear her over the wind. "The east pasture. Something's wrong there. How do you—" "Trust me." They fought their way across the property, heads bowed against the onslaught. The snow had already accumulated several inches, making each step a struggle. Marcus's lungs burned from breathing the frigid air, and his fingers were going numb despite his gloves. The east pasture held 3 of his cattle, a bull and 2 cows he'd been planning to breed in the spring. As they approached the fence line, he could make out dark shapes huddled against the barrier, but something was wrong with the picture. Stella reached the fence first and pointed. There. One of the cows had gotten tangled in broken fencing, wire wrapped around her legs and neck. She'd struggled against it, making it worse, and now she was down on her side, bleeding from where the wire had cut into her hide. The other animals stood nearby, as if trying to protect her from the storm. Marcus vaulted the fence and dropped to his knees beside the injured cow. The wire had cut deep, and blood stained the snow around her. She was breathing, but her eyes were glazed with pain and exhaustion. "We have to get her out of this," he shouted to Stella over the wind. "Help me with the wire." Stella was beside him in an instant. Together they worked to untangle the wire, carefully lifting each strand away from the cow's flesh. The animal bellowed in pain but didn't struggle, another small mercy. It took them nearly 30 minutes of painstaking work, their fingers growing clumsier with each passing moment. Finally, the last strand came free. Marcus examined the wounds. They were bad, but not fatal if they could get her back to the barn and treat them properly. "We need to get her moving," Marcus said. "She'll freeze if she stays down." He tried to rouse the cow, pushing against her side, but she wouldn't budge. She was too weak, too cold, too traumatized. Stella knelt in the snow beside the animal's head and placed both hands on her face, one on each side. She leaned in close, her forehead nearly touching the cow's, and went perfectly still. Marcus had seen her do this with Hazel, but this was different. This wasn't calming a frightened animal. This was reaching something deeper, something primal. The cow's breathing changed, became stronger, more regular. Her eyes cleared, focusing on Stella with what looked almost like recognition. Then slowly, impossibly, she began to rise. Her legs shook violently, and twice she nearly collapsed, but Stella stayed with her, hands never leaving the animal's face, that intense focus never wavering. Finally, the cow was upright, swaying but standing. "Come on, girl," Stella said softly, taking hold of the makeshift rope around the cow's neck. "Let's get you home." And the cow followed. Through the blizzard, through drifts that came up to her knees, through wind that would have sent any sensible creature running for shelter, she followed Stella back to the barn, as docilely as a dog on a leash. By the time they got the cow settled in a stall and Marcus had cleaned and bandaged her wounds, both he and Stella were soaked through and shaking with cold. They staggered back to the house, barely able to feel their extremities. Inside, Marcus immediately started building up the fire, while Stella peeled off her wet outer layers with trembling fingers. Neither spoke. They were too exhausted, too cold, too overwhelmed by what had just happened. When the fire was roaring, Marcus collapsed into a chair, his entire body aching. Stella sank down beside the hearth, holding her hands out to the flames. "How did you know?" Marcus finally asked, his voice hoarse. "About the cow." "How did you know she was in trouble?" Stella stared into the fire, her face illuminated by its glow. "I told you." Hazel knew. She was trying to tell us, but how did you understand her? She was quiet for a long time. Then slowly she began to speak. "When I was in that cellar, I lost track of time. Days, weeks, months, they all blurred together. The only way I stayed sane was by listening. Really listening. Not just to sounds, but to everything, the way the air moved. The way the darkness felt, the vibrations in the ground." She wrapped her arms around herself. "There were rats down there. At first I was terrified of them, but eventually I realized they were just trying to survive, same as me. So I started paying attention to them. When they were agitated, I knew Edmund was coming. When they were calm, I knew I was safe for a while. It was like they were talking to me in a way." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You learned to read them. Not just them, everything. I could tell when it was going to rain by the way the wood in the floor expanded. I could tell what time of day it was by the temperature. I could hear things happening in the world above me that I shouldn't have been able to hear." She turned to look at him. 3 years of nothing but listening teaches you things. Things most people never learn because they're too busy talking, too busy filling every silence with noise. So when Hazel panicked, I knew she was sensing something. I just had to figure out what. And when I touched her, when I really focused, I could feel it, not in words, but in impressions, fear, urgency, the direction it was coming from. Marcus rubbed his hands over his face. "That's not normal, Stella. I know. People would think you're—" "I know," she said again, her voice harder. "That's why you can't tell anyone." I wasn't going to. She searched his face, looking for doubt or fear, but found only wonder and exhaustion. "You don't think I'm crazy? I think you saved that cow's life. I think you probably saved mine too, because I never would have thought to check the east pasture in this storm." He paused. "I think you're extraordinary." Stella's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "I'm not. I'm just broken in a different way than most people." "You're not broken." Marcus stood and crossed to where she sat, then knelt down so they were at eye level. "You're not broken, Stella. You're the strongest person I've ever met." She shook her head, but he caught her chin gently, making her look at him. "Listen to me. What Edmund did to you, that wasn't your fault. And what you became because of it, these abilities you have, they're not a curse. They're a gift. You saved that animal today. You've probably saved a dozen others since you've been here, in ways I haven't even noticed. People won't see it that way. Then people are fools." His thumb brushed across her cheek, and he realized too late how intimate the gesture was. He started to pull away, but Stella caught his wrist. "Don't," she whispered. They stayed like that, frozen in the firelight, the storm raging outside while something else entirely stormed between them. Marcus could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, could see the rapid rise and fall of Stella's chest. "I should get more wood for the fire," he said, his voice rough. "Marcus," but he was already standing, already moving away, putting distance between them before he did something foolish. Before he reached for her, the way every fiber of his being was screaming at him to do, because she wasn't ready, because she'd been through hell, because she deserved someone who could give her more than a failing plantation and a lonely life in the middle of nowhere, because he was terrified that if he let himself feel what he was feeling, he'd never recover when she inevitably left. That night, as the blizzard continued to bury the world in white, Marcus lay awake in his bed upstairs, staring at the ceiling. Below him, in her small room off the kitchen, Stella did the same. Both of them are thinking about the same moment, both of them wondering what might have happened if he hadn't walked away. The blizzard lasted 3 days, burying the plantation under 2 feet of snow and transforming the landscape into an alien world of white silence. When it finally broke, the sky cleared to a crystalline blue so bright it hurt to look at, and the temperature plummeted even further. Everything froze, the well, the water troughs. Even the chickens' water dishes turned to solid ice overnight. Marcus and Stella worked side by side through those frigid days, their breath forming clouds in the air, their movements efficient and practiced. They didn't speak about the moment by the fire. They didn't need to. It hung between them like smoke, present but intangible, something both acknowledged and ignored. By the 4th day after the storm, the main road into town had been cleared enough for wagon traffic, and Marcus knew he needed to make the journey. Their supplies were running low: flour, salt, kerosene for the lamps. Things that couldn't wait much longer. "I'll be back before dark," he told Stella as he hitched the wagon. "There's wood stacked by the door if you need it. Don't go wandering too far from the house." She stood on the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her breath misting in the cold air. "I'll be fine. I know, just be careful." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "What aren't you saying?" Marcus adjusted the harness, not meeting her eyes. "People in town talk. They're going to have questions about you. Let them question. Stella, I'm not hiding anymore, Marcus. I spent 3 years hidden in the dark. I'm not going back to that, not for anyone." He finally looked at her, seeing the steel in her spine, the determination in her eyes. "Just stay close to the house, please." She nodded, but he could tell she was only agreeing to ease his worry. Not because she feared anything the town might say or do. The journey to Ashford took 2 hours, the wagon wheels crunching through packed snow and ice. The town itself looked different under its white blanket, softer somehow. Though Marcus knew the people inside those buildings were anything but soft, he went to Morrison's General Store first, a squat brick building on Main Street that smelled of tobacco, coffee, and sawdust. Walter Morrison stood behind the counter, a heavy-set man with mutton-chop sideburns and suspicious eyes. "Thorne," Morrison grunted by way of greeting. "Didn't expect to see you after that storm. Need supplies." Marcus pulled out his list. "Flour, salt, kerosene, coffee if you have it." Morrison squinted at the list, then at Marcus. "Heard you bought yourself some help at the auction last month." Marcus kept his voice neutral. "I did. That Hayes girl. The one old Edmund kept locked up like an animal. Her name is Stella. Heard she's touched in the head." "Heard Edmund said she was dangerous." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "Edmund was a drunk and a liar. Stella's neither dangerous nor touched. She's a hard worker, and she's done nothing to deserve the reputation people are trying to pin on her." Morrison snorted. "You defending her already? And barely knows a woman a month, and he's acting like, I'd appreciate it if you'd fill the order, Walter. I've got a long drive back." The storekeeper muttered something under his breath, but began gathering the items. As he worked, other customers filtered in, and Marcus could feel their eyes on him, hear the whispers that weren't quite whispered enough. "That's Thorne. Bought the Hayes girl. I heard she's living in his house, unmarried, both of them. It's unseemly." Marcus paid for his supplies without acknowledging the talk, loaded the wagon, and was preparing to leave when Pastor William Hendricks approached, his black coat stark against the snow. "Marcus, a word." Marcus bit back a sigh. "Pastor." Hendricks was a thin man with a narrow face and the kind of righteous certainty that Marcus had always found exhausting. "I've been hearing troubling things about your situation." "My situation is my own business. When it concerns the moral fabric of this community, it becomes everyone's business." Hendricks clasped his hands behind his back. "You've taken in a woman of questionable character, unmarried, and installed her in your home without benefit of clergy or propriety. People are concerned. People should mind their own affairs. She was locked up for a reason, Marcus. Edmund Hayes may have been a hard man, but he wasn't foolish. If he felt the need to restrain her, he was a monster who tortured a young woman for 3 years. Marcus's voice was low and dangerous. And if you're defending him, Pastor, then you and I have very different definitions of morality. Hendrik stiffened. I'm not defending anyone. I'm merely suggesting that you consider the implications of your choices. A single man, a woman of unknown background, living together without supervision. It reflects poorly on both of you. Then people can stop looking. It's not that simple. The ladies of the church have been talking. There's concern that her presence might be corrupting, that she might be leading you astray. Marcus laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. Leading me astray? She cooks, she cleans, she works harder than any hired hand I've ever had. If that's corruption, then I'll take it over your congregation's righteousness any day. You're making a mistake. No, Pastor. The mistake is thinking you have any say in how I live my life. Marcus climbed onto the wagon. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a long drive ahead of me. He snapped the reins and the wagon lurched forward, leaving Hendrik standing in the snow, looking simultaneously. Affronted and concerned, but Marcus's troubles weren't over. He'd made it halfway out of town when he encountered Samuel Carver and his 2 sons blocking the road. Carver was a bear of a man, a cattle rancher who owned the spread adjacent to Marcus's property. His sons, Thomas and James, were younger versions of their father, big, loud, and mean when they'd been drinking. "Thorn," Carver called out, not moving from the center of the road. "Heard you've got yourself a new woman." Marcus pulled the wagon to a stop. "I've got a hired hand. Now move aside. Hired hand?" Thomas laughed, the sound ugly. "That's what they're calling it now?" "Funny thing," Carver continued, stroking his beard. "We've been losing cattle. 3 head in the last 2 weeks, and they've been disappearing from the pasture closest to your property line." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You're accusing me of something, Sam." "Not you, but that girl you brought back. Everyone knows Edmund kept her locked up because she was a thief. Maybe she's up to her old tricks. Stella hasn't stolen anything. You sure about that? You watch her every minute of the day?" "I'm sure. And even if I wasn't, your cattle problems have nothing to do with her." James stepped closer to the wagon. "Pa's being polite, Thorn. What he means is, we don't want trash like her around here. Bad enough Edmund kept her alive as long as he did. Should have put her down like the animal she was. Marcus was off the wagon before he consciously decided to move. He grabbed James by the collar and shoved him backward into the snow. "Say that again." "I dare you." James scrambled to his feet, fists raised, but Carver stepped between them. "Easy now. No need for violence. We're just concerned citizens, Thorn. Concerned about the kind of people you're associating with. My associations are none of your concern. They are when they affect our property, when they affect our families." Carver's voice hardened. "That girl's got a reputation. People are scared of her. And scared people do desperate things. Is that a threat?" "It's advice. Get rid of her before something happens that can't be undone." Marcus climbed back onto the wagon, his knuckles white on the reins. "You come near my property, any of you, and it'll be the last mistake you make. That's not advice. That's a promise." He drove around them, forcing them to step aside or be run over. As he left town, he could feel their eyes boring into his back. The journey home felt longer than it should have. The wagon wheels creaked through the frozen ruts, and Marcus's mind churned with the encounters he'd just had. He'd known there would be talk. There always was in small towns, but he hadn't expected it to turn hostile so quickly. By the time he crested the hill overlooking his property, the sun was already sinking toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of orange and pink. Smoke rose from the chimney. Stella had kept the fire going. Everything looked peaceful, untouched, but something felt wrong. Marcus urged the horses faster, and as he drew closer to the house, he saw why. There were tracks in the snow. Bootprints, lots of them, circling the house, the barn, even the chicken coop. Fresh tracks made within the last few hours. He pulled the wagon to a stop and jumped down, his heart hammering. "Stella!" The front door opened and she appeared, calm and unharmed. but her face was tight with tension. "They came about an hour after you left." "Who? How many?" "5 women. Wives from town, I think. They wanted to talk." Marcus climbed the porch steps. "What did they say?" Stella crossed her arms, and he could see she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "They said I was a corrupting influence, that I was living in sin, that decent women wouldn't associate with me, and decent men shouldn't either." She paused. "They said I should leave. For your sake, for my sake. They said I was ruining your reputation, that you'd never find a proper wife as long as I was here, that I was using you." The last words came out bitter. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and sharp. "What did you tell them?" "I told them you gave me a place to stay when no one else would, that I owed you my life, that I wasn't leaving unless you asked me to." She met his eyes. "Was that wrong?" "No, God, no. You did exactly right." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "But they're not going to stop. I had run-ins with half the town today. The pastor, the carvers, Morrison at the store. They're all saying the same things, that I'm dangerous, that you're not welcome here." Stella turned away, staring out at the snow-covered fields. "Maybe they're right. They're not. Marcus, I'm destroying your life. You can't do business in town without people whispering. You can't go to church without being lectured. Your neighbors think you're harboring a criminal." Her voice cracked slightly. "Maybe I should go." He grabbed her arm and turned her to face him. "No, absolutely not. You'd be better off without me. That's the biggest lie you've ever told." His grip gentlened, but he didn't let go. "You want to know what I'd be without you? Alone, going through the motions, talking to no one, trusting no one, feeling nothing. That's what I was before you came here, and I'm not going back to that. Not for the town, not for the church, not for anyone." Tears spilled down Stella's cheeks. "They'll make your life hell. They can try. Marcus, I mean it, Stella. I don't care what they say. I don't care what they think. You're staying, and that's final." She stared at him, searching his face for doubt or reservation. Finding none, she collapsed against his chest, sobbing in a way she hadn't allowed herself to since he'd brought her home. Marcus wrapped his arms around her, holding her while she shook, letting her release the fear and pain she'd been carrying. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his shirt. "I'm so sorry. You have nothing to be sorry for. I've brought you nothing but trouble. You've brought me back to life." She pulled back enough to look at him, her eyes red and wet. "What? I was dead before you came here, Stella. Oh, I was walking around, working, eating, sleeping, but I wasn't living. I was just existing, going through the motions of a life without actually having one." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. "You changed that. You made me care again, made me feel again, made me want to fight for something other than just getting through another day. I don't understand. I'm saying I need you here, not because you're useful, not because you work hard, but because—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "Because what?" Marcus took a breath. This was it. The moment where he either said what he'd been feeling for weeks or let it die unspoken. "Because I'm falling in love with you." Stella went completely still. The world seemed to hold its breath with her. "You don't have to say anything," Marcus continued quickly. "I know you've been through hell. I know you probably don't feel the same way. But I needed you to know that you're not just someone I'm helping out of pity. You're everything. And if the town wants to come after me for that, let them come." Stella's hands came up to cover his, where they still held her face. "Marcus!" A gunshot cracked through the air, echoing across the frozen landscape. They both spun toward the sound. In the distance, near the eastern fence line, Marcus could see flames beginning to lick up from what looked like a pile of debris. "The hay storage," he breathed. Another shot. Then another. Figures on horseback moved in the growing darkness, circling the property. The town wasn't just talking anymore. They were acting. Marcus ran for the barn, his boots pounding through the snow. Behind him, Stella followed, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The flames from the hay storage illuminated the dusk in angry orange, casting dancing shadows across the white landscape. More shots rang out, the reports echoing off the trees like thunder. "Stay in the house!" Marcus shouted over his shoulder, but Stella ignored him, matching his pace stride for stride. They reached the barn just as another figure on horseback galloped past, torch in hand. Marcus caught a glimpse of the rider's face, Thomas Carver, eyes wild with drink and righteousness. The torch arced through the air and landed on the barn roof. It missed the shingles and tumbled into a snowbank, hissing out in a plume of steam. Marcus burst into the barn. Hazel was screaming, rearing in her stall, eyes rolling white with terror. The cow they'd rescued during the blizzard bellowed frantically, thrashing against the boards. The other animals had caught the panic, creating a cacophony of fear. "We need to get them out." Stella was already at Hazel's stall, throwing open the door. The mare bolted past her, nearly trampling her in the rush for open air. Marcus freed the cattle, while Stella released the 2 goats he kept for milk. Animals streamed out of the barn into the snowy night, scattering in all directions. It was chaos, but at least they'd be alive. Another rider circled back, and Marcus recognized Samuel Carver's bulk on the saddle. "This is your last warning, Thorn. Send that witch away, or next time we burn the house with both of you in it." Marcus grabbed the pitchfork hanging on the barn wall and stepped outside. "You're on my property, Carver. That's trespassing and arson. Leave now, or I'll have the sheriff." Carver's laugh was harsh and bitter. "The sheriff? John Pemberton's my wife's cousin. You think he's going to side with you over us? Over decent Christian folk trying to protect their community? By burning a man's property? By terrorizing livestock? That's your idea of Christian behavior? We're cleansing this land of corruption." This came from another rider, a woman Marcus now recognized as Agnes Hendricks, the pastor's wife. She sat side-saddle on a chestnut mare, her face twisted with fervor. "That creature you've brought into your home is an abomination. She consorts with dark forces. She bewitched Edmund Hayes, drove him to drink and madness, and now she's doing the same to you. The only madness here is yours." Marcus stepped forward, pitchfork raised. "Stella's done nothing wrong. She speaks to demons." Another voice, another rider. Marcus counted 6 of them now, circling like wolves. Mary Simmons saw her talking to the animals, saw them obeying her like she was Satan himself. "She has a way with animals." "That doesn't make her a witch. She knew about the storm before it came." Thomas Carver shouted. "She knew about the cow in the fence. She knows things she shouldn't know." "Explain that." Marcus couldn't. He had no explanation that would satisfy them, no rational argument that would penetrate their fear and superstition. These people had made up their minds before they'd ever ridden onto his property. Stella appeared beside him, her face pale but determined. "Leave him alone. This is about me, not him." "Get back inside," Marcus hissed, but she ignored him. "You want me gone?" Stella called out to the riders. "Fine, I'll leave tonight. Just stop this. Stop hurting him." "No!" Marcus grabbed her arm. "You're not going anywhere. Marcus, look around. They've already burned your hay storage. They're threatening to burn your house. How many more attacks before they succeed? Before someone gets killed?" Her eyes pleaded with him. "Let me go, please." Stella, a riderless horse, burst from the tree line, galloping at full speed directly toward the group of vigilantes. It was Hazel, mane flying, hooves throwing up sprays of snow. She charged straight at Samuel Carver's mount, and the larger horse shied violently, nearly throwing its rider. The other horses scattered, their riders shouting and struggling to maintain control. In the confusion, Stella closed her eyes and went very still. That same intense focus Marcus had seen her use before. Her lips didn't move, but her whole body seemed to vibrate with concentration. The animals responded. Hazel wheeled and charged again, this time at Agnes Hendricks. The pastor's wife screamed and yanked on the reins, but her mare was already bolting, crashing through a fence and racing toward the road. One by one, the vigilantes' horses panicked, bucking and spinning, refusing to obey their riders' commands. Thomas Carver's mount threw him entirely, sending him sprawling into the snow. James Carver managed to stay in the saddle, but his horse was galloping in frantic circles, completely out of control. "Witch!" Samuel Carver roared, fighting to stay mounted. "See? She's controlling them. She's proving everything we said." But his horse wasn't listening. The animal reared, front hooves pawing the air, then took off at a dead run toward the road, with Carver clinging desperately to the saddle horn. Within minutes, all 6 riders had either been thrown or carried off by their panicked mounts. The property fell silent except for the crackling of the still-burning hay storage and the heavy breathing of the scattered livestock. Stella opened her eyes and swayed. Marcus caught her as her knees buckled, lowering her gently to the ground. "I'm all right," she whispered, but her face was ashen and sweat beaded her forehead despite the cold. "Just give me a moment. What did you do?" "What I had to." She closed her eyes again, breathing deeply. "They won't be back tonight. Their horses won't come near this property for days, maybe weeks." Marcus stared at her in awe and fear. Not fear of her, fear for her. "Stella, they saw. They all saw what you can do. I know. They're going to come back. And next time it won't be just 6 people on horses. It'll be the whole town." "I know," she said again, her voice barely audible. Marcus looked at the burning hay storage, at the scattered animals, at the woman trembling in his arms. Everything was falling apart, and he was powerless to stop it. "We need to put out that fire before it spreads," Stella said, trying to stand. Her legs gave out again. "You're in no condition." "I said I'm fine." But she clearly wasn't. Whatever she'd done to the horses had drained her completely. Marcus lifted her in his arms. She started to protest, but he cut her off. "Don't argue. For once in your stubborn life, just let someone help you." He carried her to the house and laid her on the bed in her small room. She tried to sit up, but he pressed a hand gently to her shoulder. "Stay, I'll handle the fire." "Marcus, stay." He grabbed every bucket and basin he could find, filled them with snow, and spent the next 2 hours battling the flames. By the time he'd finally beaten them back, exhaustion had settled into his bones like lead. The hay storage was a total loss, just a smoking pile of charred wood and ash. But the fire hadn't spread, and that was something. He found the animals gradually returning on their own, drawn back by familiarity and the promise of shelter. Hazel came last, trotting up to the barn as docile as a lamb, showing no sign of the fury she'd displayed earlier. Marcus got them all secured, gave them feed and water, then stumbled back to the house. Dawn was beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of grey and pink. He hadn't slept in over 24 hours, and every muscle in his body screamed for rest. Inside, he found Stella awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She'd changed into a clean dress and braided her hair, but she still looked pale and drawn. "You should be resting," Marcus said, collapsing into the chair across from her. "So should you. I had to make sure the animals were safe." "And are they?" "Yes, thanks to you." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Stella, what you did out there was necessary, was dangerous. For you. Do you have any idea what people will do once word spreads? They already thought you were strange. Now they'll think you're a witch, I know. Let them think it." She met his eyes across the table. "I'm tired of hiding what I am, Marcus. I'm tired of pretending to be normal, to be less than I am, just so people won't be afraid. Edmund tried to beat it out of me. He tried to lock me away until I forgot. But I didn't forget, and I won't apologize for surviving." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to be careful. These people are dangerous when they're scared. I know. That's why I need to show them they have nothing to fear. How? I don't know yet, but hiding, running, that's not the answer. That's what I did for 3 years, and it nearly destroyed me." She squeezed his hand. "I can't go back to being that person." "I won't." They sat in silence for a long moment, hands clasped across the table, the weight of everything unsaid, hanging between them like morning mist. Finally, Stella spoke again, her voice soft. "What you said last night, before the shooting started, did you mean it?" Marcus's heart stuttered. "Every word. Say it again, please. I need to hear it without gunfire and flames." He stood and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair so they were eye to eye. "I'm in love with you, Stella Hayes. I've been falling for weeks, maybe since the first moment I saw you standing on that platform refusing to break. I love your strength, your courage, your stubborn refusal to be anything other than exactly who you are. I love the way you gentle the animals with just a touch. I love the way you read by the fire at night. I love the way you hum when you think no one's listening." He paused, searching her face. "I love everything about you, and I don't care who knows it." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm broken, Marcus. I'm strange and damaged, and I'll never be normal. Good, normal's overrated." He cupped her face in his hands. "And you're not broken. You're extraordinary. She swallowed hard. "I've never been in love before." "I don't know how to do this. Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." She leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, questioning, as if she wasn't sure she had the right. But Marcus answered by pulling her closer, deepening the kiss, pouring 3 years of loneliness and longing into that single moment of connection when they finally broke apart. Both breathing hard, Stella rested her forehead against his. "I love you too. I think I have since you took those chains off my wrists. Since you looked at me like I was a person instead of property. You were always a person. The best person I've ever known." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms as the sun rose higher and painted the kitchen in golden light. Outside, the world might be falling apart, the town might be turning against them, but in this moment, in this space, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. Later that morning, as they worked together to clear the debris from the burned hay storage, a rider appeared on the road. Marcus tensed, reaching for the rifle he'd propped against the fence. But Stella touched his arm. "Wait, that's not one of them." The rider drew closer, and Marcus recognized him. Dr. James Whitmore, the town physician. He was an older man, probably in his 60s, with a shock of white hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Marcus had always respected him, but he had no idea what the doctor wanted now. Whitmore dismounted and approached slowly, hands visible. "Marcus, Miss Hayes, may I speak with you?" "If you're here to threaten us," Marcus began, but Whitmore shook his head. "I'm here to apologize." "And to warn you." Marcus and Stella exchanged glances. "Warn us about what?" "There's going to be a meeting tonight. At the church. The Carvers, the Hendricks, half the town. They're organizing. They mean to drive Miss Hayes out, by whatever means necessary." Whitmore looked uncomfortable. "Some are even talking about a formal accusation of witchcraft." "Witchcraft? That's medieval nonsense." "I agree. But frightened people do irrational things. And after what happened last night," he glanced at Stella, "they're convinced you're a threat." "I saved that cow during the blizzard," Stella said quietly. "I helped calm the horses. I've done nothing but help, I believe you. But they don't see it that way. They see someone who knows things she shouldn't, who has an unnatural influence over animals." Whitmore sighed heavily. "They're planning to petition the sheriff to remove you from Marcus's property. And if the sheriff won't act, they'll form a mob." Marcus felt ice in his veins. "When?" "Tomorrow, most likely. Maybe the day after. But soon. What do we do?" Whitmore looked at them both, and there was genuine sadness in his eyes. "I don't know. Leave, maybe. Head west where no one knows you. Start over." "No!" Marcus's voice was firm. "This is my home, our home. We're not running. Then you'd better prepare for a fight. Because it's coming whether you want it or not." Whitmore remounted his horse. "I'm sorry. I wish I had better news. But I thought you deserved to know what you're facing." "Thank you, Doctor," Stella said. "For your honesty." He nodded and rode away, leaving them standing in the ruins of the hay storage, the weight of his words settling over them like fresh snow. That night, they barely slept. Marcus kept watch from the upstairs window, while Stella sat in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. Every sound made them tense, the creak of the house settling, the wind rattling the shutters, an owl calling from the woods. As dawn approached, Marcus came downstairs to find Stella at the stove. Making breakfast neither of them would be able to eat. "I have an idea," she said without turning around. "I'm listening. There's a family, the Dawsons. They live about 5 miles east of here. Their youngest daughter, Emily, has been sick for weeks. Viva cough wasting away. Dr. Whitmore can't figure out what's wrong with her. Marcus frowned. How do you know this? Mrs. Dawson came by the general store while I was there last week. I heard her talking to Morrison about it. She was crying, begging him to extend their credit so she could buy more medicine. Stella finally turned to face him. I think I can help her. Stella, if you go near that child and something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. I know what's wrong with her. I can feel it. She's not sick in the way Whitmore thinks. It's environmental. Something in their house is poisoning her. How could you possibly know that? The same way I knew about the cow. The same way I know when storms are coming. I just know. She moved closer to him. If I can save that little girl, if I can prove that what I can do is a gift and not a curse, maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll understand. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to keep her safe behind the walls of their home. But he could see the determination in her eyes, the need to prove herself not to the town, but to herself. All right, he said finally, but I'm coming with you. And if anything goes wrong, we leave immediately. Agreed? Agreed. They set out after breakfast, the wagon creaking through the snow-covered roads. The Dawson farm was small and run down, the house listing slightly to one side, the barn in need of repair. Chickens scratched in the yard, and a thin dog barked half-heartedly as they approached. Thomas Dawson met them at the door, suspicion clear on his weathered face. Thorne, what do you want? We heard about your daughter. We'd like to help. Dawson's eyes shifted to Stella, and his expression hardened. You brought her here. That witch? She's not a witch. She's someone who might be able to help Emily when no one else can. Get off my property. Mr. Dawson, please. Stella stepped forward. I know you don't know me. I know what people are saying, but your daughter is dying, and I think I know why. Just let me look at her. 5 minutes. If I'm wrong, we'll leave and never bother you again. And if you're right, then Emily lives. Dawson stared at them for a long moment. Behind him a woman appeared, his wife gaunt and hollow-eyed from weeks of worry. Tom, let her try. We've got nothing left to lose. After another agonizing pause, Dawson stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled of sickness and desperation. Emily lay in a small bed near the fire, her skin grey, her breathing shallow and labored. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Stella knelt beside the bed and placed her hand on the child's forehead. She closed her eyes, that familiar focus settling over her features. Marcus watched her face change, watched her brow furrow with concentration. Then her eyes snapped open. The chimney, it's blocked. Carbon monoxide is seeping into the house. That's what's poisoning her. Dawson looked skeptical. The chimney's fine. It's been drawing properly all winter. Not this one. Stella pointed to a smaller fireplace in the corner, cold and unused. That one. Something's nested in it, blocking the flue. Every time you light a fire in the main hearth, some of the smoke backs up through that chimney and into the house. You can't see it, can't smell it, but it's slowly killing her. That's impossible, Mrs. Dawson whispered. That fireplace hasn't been lit in years. It doesn't matter. The flues are connected. Trust me, Marcus met Dawson's eyes. It can't hurt to check. 20 minutes later, after clearing a massive bird's nest and accumulated debris from the blocked chimney, fresh air began circulating through the house properly for the first time in months. Emily's breathing eased almost immediately. Color began returning to her cheeks. Mrs. Dawson collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Her husband stood frozen, staring at Stella like he was seeing her for the first time. How did you know? He asked finally. I just did. That's not an answer. Stella met his gaze steadily. It's the only answer I have. I can't explain it any more than you can explain how you know when your land needs rain or when a storm's coming. You just feel it. This is what I feel. Dawson was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he extended his hand. Thank you. You saved my daughter's life. Stella shook his hand. And for the first time since Marcus had known her, she smiled a full, genuine smile of pure joy. As they left the Dawson farm, the sun breaking through the clouds for the first time in days, Marcus put his arm around Stella's shoulders and pulled her close. You did it, he said. We did it. No, this was all you. She leaned into him. and they rode home in comfortable silence, both of them daring to hope that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change, but neither of them could have predicted just how much. News of Emily Dawson's miraculous recovery spread through Ashford like wildfire through dry timber. By the following morning, 3 more families had shown up at Marcus's door, hesitant but desperate. A child with unexplained seizures, a man with a festering wound that wouldn't heal, an elderly woman who hadn't spoken since a fall the previous spring. Stella saw them all. She didn't ask for payment, didn't make grand pronouncements or mystical gestures. She simply listened to their bodies, to the animals around them, to the subtle rhythms that most people never noticed. The child was having reactions to mold in his bedroom. The man's wound was infected with a splinter too small to see, but large enough to poison his blood. The elderly woman had damage to her throat that proper exercises could repair. Within 3 days, all of them were improving, but improvement didn't mean acceptance. Pastor Hendricks stood in his pulpit that Sunday, his voice ringing through the packed church with righteous fury. Brothers and sisters, we are witnessing the work of darkness masquerading as light. This woman performs seeming miracles, yes, but at what cost? By what power? The devil himself can appear as an angel of light. He can heal the body while damning the soul. The congregation murmured in agreement, though Marcus noticed some faces looked uncertain now. Thomas Dawson sat in the back pew with his wife and daughter, Emily healthy and pink-cheeked between them. He didn't join the chorus of amens. I call upon this community to stand firm against corruption. Hendricks continued, his fist striking the pulpit. We must not be seduced by false wonders. We must protect our families, our children from this creature that has infiltrated our Christian community. Samuel Carver stood from his pew. The pastor's right. My horses still won't go near Thorne's property. That's not natural. That's witchcraft, pure and simple. She saved my Emily. Dawson's voice cut through the murmurs. My daughter was dying, and no one, not the doctor, not the medicine, not even prayer, was helping. This woman figured out what was wrong in 5 minutes. You call that evil? I call it suspicious, Hendricks snapped. How does one simply know such things, Thomas? How does one commune with animals, predict storms, see sickness that trained physicians cannot? These are not gifts from God, these are signs of something far more sinister. Agnes Hendricks stood beside her husband. We must think of the children. What kind of example does this set? A woman living in sin, with a man not her husband, practicing dark arts, leading good Christian souls astray. The Bible is clear about such women. They must be driven out. The church erupted in argument. Half the congregation agreed with Hendricks, calling for action. The other half, smaller but growing, defended Stella's interventions. Marcus watched from his position near the door, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Dr. Whitmore stood slowly, his calm voice somehow cutting through the chaos. I have practiced medicine for 40 years. I have seen many things I cannot explain, but I have also learned that our understanding of the human body, of nature itself, is limited. Perhaps Miss Hayes simply perceives things we have not yet learned to see. That does not make her evil. It makes her different. Different is dangerous, Carver shouted. Different is how the devil works. He sends us something that looks helpful, that looks good, and before we know it, we're all dancing to his tune. Then perhaps, a new voice spoke from the back, we should let the devil's work prove itself. Everyone turned. Sheriff John Pemberton stood in the doorway, his badge glinting in the sunlight streaming through the windows. He was a compact man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Marcus had always found him fair, despite his family connection to the Carvers. What do you mean, John? Pastor Hendricks asked carefully. I mean, we have a way to test whether Miss Hayes's abilities come from God or something else. Pemberton walked down the center aisle, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. There's a child missing. Billy Crawford, age 6. Disappeared yesterday afternoon while playing near Willow Creek. His parents have been searching all night. Dogs can't pick up a scent because of the snow. We've got maybe 20 men combing the woods. But that's a lot of territory, and time's running out. The church fell silent. If Miss Hayes can do what people claim, Pemberton continued, if she can sense things others cannot, then let her find the boy. If she succeeds, we have our answer about the nature of her gifts. If she fails, he let the implication hang in the air, and if she refuses, Hendricks challenged, then we have our answer too, don't we? All eyes turned to Marcus. He felt the weight of their stares, the expectation, the trap being carefully laid. Pemberton was clever. This wasn't just about finding Billy Crawford. This was about forcing Stella to prove herself before the entire community, with a child's life hanging in the balance. Marcus pushed through the crowd and out the church doors. He found Stella waiting by their wagon as they'd agreed. She'd refused to attend the service, knowing her presence would only inflame tensions further. "We need to go," Marcus said, climbing onto the bench. Now she read the urgency in his face and scrambled up beside him. What happened? As they rode back to the farm, Marcus explained everything. The argument in church, Pemberton's challenge, the missing child. Stella listened in silence, her face growing paler with each detail. "They're using that boy as bait," she said finally. "If I find him, they'll say I knew where he was because I'm the one who took him. If I don't find him, then you're proven a fraud, and they'll drive you out anyway." Marcus's hands tightened on the reins. "It's a trap, Stella. We should leave. Right now. Pack what we can and head west before—" "No, Stella, there's a 6-year-old child lost in the woods in freezing temperatures. He won't survive another night." She turned to him, her eyes fierce. "I don't care if it's a trap. I don't care what they think of me. That boy needs help, and if I can provide it, then I have to try, even if it destroys you." Even then, Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to drag her onto the wagon and drive until Ashford was nothing but a bad memory. But he knew that look in her eyes. She'd made up her mind, and nothing he could say would change it. They reached the farm, just as a group of riders appeared on the road. Sheriff Pemberton, Thomas Dawson, Dr. Whitmore, and surprisingly, Samuel Carver. Behind them rode at least a dozen other men. Some Marcus recognized, others he didn't. Pemberton dismounted. "Miss Hayes, I assume Thorne told you about young Billy Crawford." "He did. Will you help us search?" Stella met his gaze steadily. "I'll do more than search. I'll find him," Carver snorted. "Mighty confident for someone who's never set foot in those woods." "I don't need to have been there before." Stella climbed down from the wagon. "Give me something that belongs to the boy. Something he wore recently, something that carries his scent." Pemberton pulled a small cloth cap from his saddlebag. "His mother gave me this. He was wearing it yesterday morning." Stella took the cap in both hands and closed her eyes. The assembled men watched in silence, some skeptical, others curious, all of them tense with the weight of what was at stake. Minutes passed. The wind picked up, rustling through the bare trees. A crow called in the distance. Then Stella's eyes snapped open. "He's alive. Cold, scared, but alive. He fell into a ravine near the old Miller homestead, about 3 miles northeast of Willow Creek. His leg is injured, broken, or badly twisted. He can't climb out on his own." "The Miller place has been abandoned for years," Dawson said. "And nothing but ruins and overgrown forest. That's where he is." Stella handed the cap back to Pemberton. "We need to go now. He's been there since yesterday afternoon, and he won't last much longer." Pemberton studied her face, searching for deception or doubt. Finding neither, he nodded. "Then let's ride. Carver, Dawson, Whitmore, you're with me. The rest of you spread out and cover the other search areas in case she's wrong." "I'm coming too," Marcus said, already moving toward the barn to saddle Hazel. "And me," Stella added. Carver laughed harshly. "You, a woman? You'll just slow us down. I'm the one who knows where he is. You want to find him or not?" Pemberton held up a hand. "She comes. Thorne, get your horse. We leave in 5 minutes." The ride to the old Miller homestead was brutal. The snow had crusted over, making the horse's footing treacherous. Branches heavy with ice hung low across the path, forcing them to duck and weave. Stella rode behind Marcus on Hazel, her arms wrapped around his waist, her face pressed against his back for warmth. She directed them with unwavering certainty, calling out turns and landmarks before they even came into view. left at the lightning-struck oak. Straight through the clearing, where the old barn foundation still showed through the snow. Down the deer trail that wound between two massive boulders. How does she know this? Carver muttered to Pemberton. She's never been out here. Maybe she really can sense him, Dawson suggested. Or maybe she put him there herself. Marcus twisted in the saddle. Say that again, Carver. I dare you. Enough, Pemberton ordered. Save your energy for the search. They reached the Miller homestead just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The old house was nothing but a collapsed frame, the chimney standing like a lonely sentinel among the ruins. Beyond it, the land dropped away sharply into a series of ravines carved by centuries of water erosion. Stella slid off the horse before Marcus could stop her and ran toward the edge of the nearest ravine. Billy! Billy Crawford! Can you hear me? Silence. The wind whistled through the bare trees. Billy! She cupped her hands around her mouth. Your mother sent us. We're here to help. A faint sound drifted up from below, a child's voice, weak and frightened. Help! I'm down here! I can't get out! The men surged forward, peering over the edge. The ravine was steep and rocky, dropping at least 30 feet. At the bottom, partially hidden by snow-covered brush, they could see a small figure huddled against the rocks. Dear God, Whitmore breathed. She was right. She was exactly right. Pemberton was already uncoiling rope from his saddle. Carver, Dawson, help me rig a line. Whitmore, you're the lightest. Think you can rappel down there? I'll do it, Marcus said. I've climbed worse. They secured the rope around Marcus's chest and lowered him carefully over the edge. The descent was treacherous. The rocks were slick with ice, and loose stones cascaded down with every movement. But Marcus kept going, hand over hand, until his boots touched the ravine floor. Billy Crawford sat with his back against a boulder, his face streaked with tears and dirt. His left leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and he was shaking violently from cold and shock. But he was alive. Hey there, Billy, Marcus said gently, kneeling beside the boy. I'm Marcus. We're going to get you out of here, all right? It hurts, Billy whimpered. My leg hurts so much. I know, son, I know. But you're very brave, and you're going to be just fine. Marcus carefully examined the leg. Definitely broken, but no bone visible through the skin. That was something. He pulled off his own coat and wrapped it around the shivering child. I'm going to tie you to me, and then we're going to go up together. Can you hold on tight? Billy nodded, tears streaming down his face. Marcus secured the boy against his chest with a second rope, making sure the injured leg was immobilized as much as possible. Pull us up! Slow and steady. The ascent was agonizing. Billy whimpered with every movement, and Marcus's arms burned with the effort of keeping them both stable against the rock face. Twice his foot slipped, sending his heart into his throat. But the men above held the rope steady, pulling with careful, measured strength. When Marcus's head finally cleared the edge, multiple hands reached down to haul them both to safety. Billy's mother, who had ridden up with several other townspeople during the search, collapsed beside her son with a wail of relief and gratitude. Dr. Whitmore immediately began examining the boy. Broken tibia, possibly fibula as well. Severe hypothermia. But he'll live. If we'd waited another few hours... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. All eyes turned to Stella, who stood apart from the group, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking not from cold, but from exhaustion. What she'd done, reaching out across 3 miles of forest to sense one small child, had drained her completely. Mrs. Crawford looked up from cradling her son, her face wet with tears. You found him. You brought my baby back to me. The men did the actual finding, Stella said quietly. I just pointed them in the right direction. No. Pemberton stepped forward, his expression grave but not unkind. You did far more than that. You knew exactly where he was. Knew he was alive. Knew about the injury. You saved this boy's life, Miss Hayes. Does that mean you finally believe I'm not a witch? The question came out sharper than Stella probably intended, edged with exhaustion and pain. Pemberton removed his hat. I believe you have a gift I don't understand. But I've lived long enough to know that not understanding something doesn't make it evil. He turned to address the assembled crowd. Anyone here still think this woman is a threat? She just saved a child's life, a child who would have died without her help. Silence. Even Carver had nothing to say, though his face was tight with reluctance. Thomas Dawson spoke up. She saved my Emily. Now she's saved Billy. That's 2 children alive because of her. Anyone who calls that evil is a fool. The pastor won't see it that way, Agnes Hendricks's sister called out. He'll say it's trickery, deception. Then the pastor can take it up with God, Mrs. Crawford said fiercely, still holding her son. Because as far as I'm concerned, God sent this woman to save my boy, and I'll fight anyone who says different. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Not everyone. Some faces still showed suspicion and fear, but enough. Enough to matter. As they prepared to transport Billy back to town, Dr. Whitmore approached Stella. I'd like to learn from you if you'd be willing. What you can perceive about the human body, about illness and injury, it's remarkable. With proper training, proper understanding, we could help so many people. Stella looked at him in surprise. You want to study with me? I want to learn with you. There's a difference, he smiled kindly. Science isn't about fearing what we don't understand. It's about seeking to understand what we fear. The ride back to town was quieter than the ride out. Billy was carefully secured in a makeshift stretcher carried between 2 horses, his mother riding alongside. The sun had set, and stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Marcus rode close to Stella, watching her sway with exhaustion in the saddle. You should be proud, he said quietly. You did an incredible thing today. I just did what needed to be done. That's what makes it incredible. Back in Ashford, the entire town seemed to have gathered in the square. Word of Billy's rescue had spread fast. As the search party rode in, people crowded forward, calling out questions, reaching to touch Billy's hand as he passed, blessing him and blessing Stella in the same breath. Pastor Hendricks stood on the church steps, his face a mask of controlled fury. But even he couldn't speak against the tide of relief and gratitude that swept through the crowd. Mrs. Crawford stopped her horse in front of the church. Pastor, I know you have concerns about Miss Hayes, but my son is alive because of her. That's not evil. That's not witchcraft. That's a miracle, and I won't hear otherwise. Other voices joined hers. The parents of the children she'd helped, the Dawsons, Dr. Whitmore, even some who had previously stood against her. Hendricks opened his mouth, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in his life, he had no sermon to give, no scripture to wield. He simply turned and walked back into the church, his wife following, their defeat written in every stiff line of their backs. Marcus and Stella rode home in the dark, both too tired to speak. When they finally reached the farm, Marcus helped Stella down from the horse with gentle hands. She swayed, and he caught her, holding her steady. I need to sleep, she whispered. I can barely stand, then sleep. I'll take care of everything else. He guided her into the house and to her room. She collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, not even bothering to remove her boots. Within seconds she was unconscious. Marcus covered her with a blanket, then stood watching her sleep. Her face was peaceful despite everything, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She'd won. Not completely. There would always be those who feared what they couldn't understand. But she'd proven herself in the way that mattered most. She'd saved a child, and in doing so, she'd saved herself. Marcus bent and kissed her forehead softly. I'm so proud of you, he whispered. Then he turned and went to care for the horses, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight they could rest in the knowledge that they'd fought the darkness and won, and sometimes. That was enough. Spring came slowly to Virginia that year, arriving in tentative whispers rather than bold declarations. The snow melted in patches, revealing brown earth that gradually transformed into tentative green. Birdsong returned to the mornings, and the air lost its bitter edge, softening into something that promised renewal. Marcus stood in the eastern field, surveying the land he'd begun to prepare for planting. The soil was rich and dark, ready to receive seed. Behind him, He heard the creak of the porch door and turned to see Stella emerging with 2 cups of coffee, her hair catching the early light like polished mahogany. She'd changed in the month since Billy Crawford's rescue, not in dramatic ways, but in small, significant ones. She walked with her head higher now, her shoulders back. She smiled more easily. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes for so long had faded, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "Thought you might need this," she said. Handing him a cup. "You read my mind. No mind reading required. You always need coffee when you're planning the spring planting." She sipped her own cup, gazing out at the fields. "How much are you thinking of putting in?" "All of it, if we can manage. Wheat in the east field, corn in the south. Maybe some vegetables closer to the house, tomatoes, beans, squash." She repeated softly, a smile playing at her lips. "Yes, we. You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." "I like it very much." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. A hawk circled overhead, riding the morning thermals. In the barn, Hazel nickered softly, greeting the new day. "People have been coming by more often," Stella said. "Yesterday, while you were in town, 3 families stopped. One wanted me to look at their milk cow, said she wasn't eating properly. Another had a child with persistent nightmares. The third just wanted to thank Billy again for Billy." "What did you tell them?" "I helped with the cow. She had an infected tooth, simple fix. Talked to the child's mother about what might be causing anxiety. And I accepted the thanks because it seemed important to them." She turned to face him. "Dr. Whitmore wants me to come to his clinic once a week. Says having me examine patients before he does might help with difficult diagnoses." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "That's quite an offer." "What did you say?" "I said I'd think about it." She paused. "What do you think?" "I think you should do whatever feels right to you. But I also think you have a gift that could help a lot of people. Seems a shame not to use it, I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. "Not of the work itself, but of what it might mean. If I become known as the woman who can sense illness, who can predict things, won't that just make me more of an oddity? More of a target?" Marcus set down his cup and took her hands in his. "You'll always be different, Stella. That's not something you can change, and honestly, I wouldn't want you to. But being different and being alone don't have to be the same thing. You've proven that. You've shown this community that your gifts can be used for good. Most people see that now. Most, not all. No, not all. But when have you ever cared about pleasing everyone?" She laughed, a sound that still surprised him with its brightness. "You know me too well. I'm counting on spending the rest of my life getting to know you even better." The words hung between them, weighted with implication. They'd been dancing around this conversation for weeks, both knowing where they were heading, but neither quite ready to take the final step. Stella's breath caught. "Marcus, marry me." The words came out in a rush, unplanned and inelegant, but absolutely sincere. "I know we haven't talked about it formally. I know there are 100 reasons why you might say no, but I love you, Stella Hayes, and I want to spend every day of my life with you. I want to plant these fields with you. I want to grow old with you. I want to face whatever comes next, knowing you're beside me." Tears gathered in her eyes, catching the light. "People will talk. They'll say you're marrying damaged goods, that you're settling for—" "I'm not settling for anything. I'm choosing everything I've ever wanted." He cupped her face in his calloused hands. "You are the strongest, bravest, most extraordinary person I've ever known. Marrying you wouldn't be charity or pity or any of the other things small-minded people might claim. It would be the greatest honor of my life." "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of being happy. Of having something good and then losing it. Edmund took everything from me once. What if Edmund is dead and gone? He has no power over you anymore, and I'm not him. I will never be him." Marcus's voice was fierce with conviction. "I will spend every single day proving to you that love doesn't have to hurt, that trust doesn't have to be broken, that home can be a place of safety instead of fear." Stella closed her eyes, tears spilling over. When she opened them again, they shone with something that looked like hope. "Yes, yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it, the fields, the future, growing old together. Yes, to building a life that's ours and no one else's. She pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like coffee and salt and promise. Yes, Marcus Thorne. 1,000 times yes. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the farm. Pastor Hendricks had refused to perform the service, citing concerns about propriety and spiritual corruption that barely masked his lingering resentment. But Dr. Whitmore had a brother who was a judge in the county seat, and he traveled out to officiate. The gathering was small, the Dawsons, Dr. Whitmore and his wife, Sheriff Pemberton, a handful of families whose children Stella had helped. Mrs. Crawford brought Billy, who was walking with only a slight limp now, his leg healed straight and strong. Stella wore a simple dress of pale blue cotton that Marcus had bought in Richmond, along with her grandmother's pearl earrings that she'd somehow managed to keep hidden during her years with Edmund. Her hair was braided with small white flowers that Mrs. Dawson had cultivated in her greenhouse, and her face glowed with quiet joy. Marcus wore his best suit, the one he'd been married in before, but he felt no ghost of that previous life. This was different. This was right in a way nothing had ever been right before. Do you, Marcus Daniel Thorne, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Judge Whitmore asked, his voice carrying across the yard where they'd assembled. I do. And do you, Stella Marie Hayes, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? Stella's voice was clear and strong. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the Commonwealth of Virginia, I pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride. Marcus did, thoroughly and without reservation, while the assembled guests cheered and whistled. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Stella pressed her forehead to his. We did it, she whispered. We did it, he confirmed. The celebration that followed was modest but heartfelt. Mrs. Dawson had brought a cake. The Crawford family contributed fresh bread and preserves. Dr. Whitmore produced a bottle of surprisingly good wine. They ate and drank and talked as the afternoon sun stretched their shadows long across the greening fields. Thomas Dawson approached Marcus as the party wound down. I owe you an apology. For what? For not standing up sooner. When people were saying terrible things about Stella, when they wanted to drive her out, I should have spoken up earlier. Should have defended her from the start. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. You spoke up when it mattered. That's what counts. She's good for you, you know. I haven't seen you this alive in years. Maybe ever. I know. I'm the luckiest man in Virginia, Dawson smiled. Don't let her hear you say that, or she'll know you're getting soft. As evening approached and the guests began to depart, each offering congratulations and well wishes, Marcus and Stella were finally left alone. They sat together on the porch steps, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. What are you thinking? Marcus asked. That a year ago I was in a cellar convinced I would die there. Convinced no one would ever see me as anything more than Edmund's property. She leaned her head against his shoulder. And now I'm here free, married to a good man, part of a community that's beginning to accept me. It doesn't seem real. It's real. I promise you it's real. Then I'm the luckiest woman in Virginia, Marcus laughed. Dawson just said I was the luckiest man. I think we might both be right. Time moved forward, as it always does, but it moved gently for Marcus and Stella. They fell into rhythms that felt as natural as breathing, rising with the sun, working the land together, sharing quiet meals at the kitchen table. Stella began spending 2 days a week at Dr. Whitmore's clinic, and her reputation as a diagnostician grew. People traveled from neighboring counties to have her examine sick children, ailing livestock, mysterious ailments that traditional medicine couldn't solve. She never claimed to have supernatural powers, never performed elaborate rituals, or spoke in mystical terms. She simply listened to heartbeats and breathing patterns, to the subtle wrongness in a body's chemistry, to the stories that symptoms told when arranged in the right order. Some called it intuition. Others called it genius. Stella called it paying attention. The farm prospered. The wheat came golden and abundant. The corn grew tall and strong. The vegetable garden overflowed with tomatoes and beans and squash, more than they could eat themselves. They shared the surplus with neighbors, and slowly, steadily, the last walls of resistance crumbled. Even Pastor Hendricks eventually softened, though he never quite apologized. He simply stopped preaching against Stella, stopped warning his congregation about corruption and darkness. Silence, in his case, was as close to acceptance as they were likely to get. 2 years after their wedding, Stella discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They'd never discussed children explicitly, both assuming it might not be possible given everything Stella had endured. But nature, it seemed, had other plans. Dr. Whitmore monitored the pregnancy carefully, but Stella knew instinctively that everything was progressing as it should. She could feel the life growing inside her, could sense its tiny heartbeat synchronizing with her own. "It's a girl," she told Marcus one evening as they sat by the fire. "How do you know?" "The same way I know everything else. I just do." Their daughter was born on a clear October morning, arriving with minimal fuss and maximum determination. She had Marcus's dark hair and Stella's grey eyes, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she owned them both completely. They named her Rose, after the wildflowers that grew along the fence line every spring. Rose Thorn, a name that made Dr. Whitmore chuckle when he came to check on mother and child. "She's perfect," he declared after his examination. "Strong lungs, good color, excellent reflexes. You two did well." Marcus cradled his daughter with the careful reverence of a man holding something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. "She's so small." "She'll grow," Stella said from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "They always do." And Rose did grow, quickly and vigorously, as if making up for lost time. By 6 months, she was crawling with single-minded determination. By a year, she was walking and chattering in a language only she understood. By 2, she was following her mother everywhere, watching with solemn grey eyes as Stella examined patients, tended animals, worked the garden. "She has your gifts," Marcus observed one afternoon, when Rose, not yet 3, had correctly identified which chicken was about to lay eggs and which was broody. "Maybe," Stella said, "or maybe she's just observant. Either way, I'll teach her to use whatever abilities she has wisely. And I'll make sure she knows they're nothing to be ashamed of." More children came, a son named James 2 years after Rose, and another daughter, Clara, 3 years after that. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and the thunder of small feet on wooden floors. Marcus expanded the farm, buying adjacent land, when old Samuel Carver died, and his sons moved west. The wheat fields stretched further. The herds grew larger. The Thorn Farm became known throughout the county as a place of prosperity and fairness, where workers were paid honestly and animals were treated with respect. Stella's clinic work evolved into something more formal, with Dr. Whitmore's encouragement and funding from several grateful families. They established a small infirmary at the edge of town, a place where Stella could see patients, where Dr. Whitmore could teach younger physicians, where the mysterious and the medical could meet and learn from each other. The children grew, as children do. Rose became a serious girl who spent hours studying her mother's techniques, learning to quiet her mind and listen to the subtle signals that most people missed. James was more like his father, practical, steady, with a farmer's instincts and a gentle way with animals. Clara was wild and joyful, afraid of nothing, convinced she could befriend every creature from honeybees to black bears. On quiet evenings, when the children were finally asleep and the house had settled into peaceful silence, Marcus and Stella would sit together on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Do you ever regret it?" Stella asked one such evening, her hand resting in his. "Regret what?" "Buying me at that auction. Taking on all the trouble I brought with me. Your life would have been simpler without me." Marcus turned to look at her, this woman who had transformed his world. Grey was threading through her dark hair now, and fine lines creased the corners of her eyes, but she was more beautiful to him than she'd been that first day in Ashford. Because now he knew her, every scar, every strength, every vulnerable place she'd learned to protect. Simpler, yes, but simpler isn't better. He raised her hand to his lips. You want to know what I regret? I regret every day before I met you. Every year I spent alone, thinking that was all life had to offer. Every moment I didn't know that love could feel like this. Tears shimmered in her eyes, even with all the fighting, all the fear, especially because of that. Because we fought for this. Because we chose each other when everyone said we shouldn't. Because we built something real from nothing but hope and stubbornness. He pulled her closer. You're not something I endure, Stella. You're the reason I wake up grateful every single morning. They sat together in the darkness, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built a life that defied every expectation. The farm spread around them, peaceful and productive. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the barn, the animals rested quietly. And overhead, the stars watched as they had always watched, bearing witness to love that refused to be diminished. Years continued to pass in their gentle, relentless way. Marcus's hair went white. Stella's hands developed the slight tremor of age. The children grew into adults with families of their own. Rose became a physician, combining her mother's intuitive gifts with formal medical training. James took over the farm, expanding it further while maintaining his father's principles. Clara married a teacher and moved to Richmond, where she opened a school for children others had written off as unteachable. And through it all, Marcus and Stella remained. The boy who had been lost was found in his 50s, healthy and whole, and brought his own children to meet the woman who had saved his life. The Dawsons' grandchildren played with the Thorns' grandchildren. Dr. Whitmore died peacefully at 87, leaving his practice to Rose, knowing it was in capable hands. Even Pastor Hendricks, on his deathbed, sent word asking for Stella's forgiveness. She went to him, held his aged hand, and told him there was nothing to forgive, that fear was human and growth was holy, and he'd done the best he could with the understanding he had on a warm September evening, nearly 40 years after they'd first met. Marcus and Stella sat together on their porch one last time. He was 82 now, his body failing, but his mind still sharp. She was 61, strong and vital, but she could feel the exhaustion that came with decades of listening so intently to everything around her. "Do you remember that first day?" Marcus asked, his voice thin but steady. "When I saw you on that platform? Every detail, the chains, the crowd, the way you looked at me like I was a person instead of property. I fell in love with you that day, you know. Didn't realize it then, but I did." Stella smiled, tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. "I know, I felt it. Even through all the fear and pain, I felt you seeing me. Best $15 I ever spent." She laughed, the sound still bright despite everything. "That's what you paid for the horse too, remember? Best $30 then." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting everything gold. Their hands were clasped together, fingers interlaced in a grip that 40 years had made instinctive. "No regrets?" Stella whispered. "Not a single one. Promise." "I promise you. Only that we didn't have more time. We had enough. We had everything that mattered." Marcus died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep with Stella beside him, and his children gathered around. His last words were, "Thank you," though no one was sure if he was speaking to them or to some greater force that had given him the gift of Stella's love. Stella lived another 15 years, becoming the beloved matriarch of a sprawling family that included children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued her diagnostic work until she was 70, finally retiring when her gifts began to fade, dulled by time and exhaustion. But even in her final years, children would come to her porch seeking stories, and she would tell them about a man who saw past dirt and chains to the person underneath, about love that grew from $15 and a desperate choice, about proving that different didn't mean dangerous and that gifts were meant to be shared, not hidden. She died on a spring morning, surrounded by wildflowers and family, with Rose holding one hand and James the other. Her last words were simply, "I'm coming, Marcus," and those who heard them said her face transformed with joy. They buried her beside him on the hill overlooking the farm, Under the oak tree they'd planted together on their first anniversary. The stone was simple. Stella Thorne, 1863–1939. She heard what others could not. She loved without condition. She lived without fear. And below that, in smaller letters, beloved wife. Mother, healer, friend, the farm still stands, now run by great-great-grandchildren who've never known chains or fear or the kind of cruelty that once defined Stella's world. The infirmary became a hospital. The story became legend, and the love between a lonely rancher and the woman everyone called worthless became the foundation for generations of kindness, courage, and the radical belief that every person deserves to be seen, not for what they appear to be, but for who they truly are. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.